Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. My name is Joanne Duclas, and I am the Executive Director for the Groningen Declaration Network, fondly referred to as the GDN Network. Today, and with these conversations, we're seeking to share ideas and information with all of you to help you in your daily work. And I know from looking at the attendees that we have people from all manner of organizations and walks of life. But we're going to be taking a particular focus looking at these topics of quantum computing, AI, document fraud from a lens of learner mobility and credential recognition. Of course, we'll have to do some housekeeping definitional things, etc. But I'm hoping to explore the cross-disciplinary aspects of all these different pillars and how we need to start thinking differently about how we do our work, how we need to think differently about how the process and the experience will be and is for learners as change happens. I'm going to invite our audience. We do have a chat Q&A function. You're welcome to share links in the chat of papers you've seen that you think would be helpful to the discussion. In addition, in the Q&A, please feel free to drop your questions because I will try to weave it into the conversation with my colleagues here today. And we will be posting the published video in the GDN video library on our website after this event so that, and letting people know who have registered so that you can access the materials as we continue to build out the website information for all of you. Thank you, friends. I really appreciate you joining me here today. Alex, I'd love it if you could start. Just tell us a little bit about who you are. You've helped us on a few fronts, and I know you wear multiple hats.
Thank you. Thank you so much. My name is Alex Jackal. I'm the CEO of Bardic Systems, which is a small data governance and architecture firm. And I work with state education agencies, the federal government, vendors, and school districts and community colleges on solving difficult data and governance problems. One of the things I'm doing is I'm the chair of Data Standards United, which is a organization dedicated to us rationalizing the standard space for learning and workforce and working with people to solve the technological interoperability problems in a smart way that's sustainable, maintainable by small organizations, and also useful for large organizations. So I look forward to being here, and thank you all.
Thanks so much, Alex. I really appreciate that. And the standards piece is a really important piece for the benefits of our audience. Alex is in many ways talking about data standards to facilitate data exchange, but we appreciate, and he can also speak to, as can others, other layers of standards, quality assurance standards, frameworks, and the like. But when we use the word standards, we just wanted to make sure you knew that it could have multiple dimensions.
Yes.
So, Bettina, love to say hello and learn more about who you are and what brings you to this conversation.
Hi, everyone, and thank you for having me. I'm president-elect at TISEP. TISEP is a global organization for credential evaluators, and our organization aims to share best practices and set standards for the profession. I also work as a credential evaluator for the Swedish Council for Higher Education, and I actually have been involved in several digital transformation projects. I have been involved with European digital credentials, for example, and this involvement actually also inspired me to start studies in AI. So in the last couple of years, I have been studying AI because, as Joanne mentioned in the beginning, I understood quite early that we need to think differently from now on to be able to be more effective in our field and handle both the opportunities and challenges of AI.
Thanks so much, Bettina. I'm really interested in digging into that with you. Eric, hello.
Hello, and thanks for having me. I'm Eric Hiataho. I'm actually a senior scientist at VTT, which is Finland's technical research center. And I'm actually in a research team that's focused around cryptography, though my interests also align in the realm of quantum, and that's what you kind of see behind me, actually. It's the VTT's quantum computer. We actually have two of them currently. But my background is in mathematics. I'm a PhD from Ohio University in the United States in 2018 in error correcting coding theory, and have landed in the realm of what's called post-quantum cryptography, and be talking about that quite a bit more. And my interests have aligned in the security of credentials as well, and that's heavily why I'm part of these conversations.
And it's interesting, Eric, I actually met you at an Epic Open Recognition conference in Paris a year or so ago. And as soon as I heard Eric, I said to him, I'm not hearing enough about quantum computing and the implications in the recognition space. And I'd really like to draw that story in a little bit more. So I really appreciate it. For those of you who don't know me, I am one of the co-founders for the MyCRES National Network in Canada. In addition to being, I'm no longer with them, but I will say that the GDN inspired our work in that Canadian space. And that's why I decided to start helping and participating with the GDN more closely. It's a cross-disciplinary expert group of thought giants from around the world who really know uh, how to properly support learners with learner mobility, credentialing, digitization, and the like. In my experience, Eric, when I was going down that path, single sign-on and authentication. These were all things that mattered and continue to matter. I've even had a meeting this week about this very topic because we are troubleshooting on a particular front. And Alex, when I talk about standards, it's multiple standards that we had to straddle in our work and make multiple systems work together. So it's quite complex. But I'd like to first start with Bettina before I circle to what is quantum computing, just to make sure we anchor it in the recognition space. Bettina, I'd like to ask you this question. Why do all these disciplines matter for effective credential recognition from your point of view?
Yeah, we can say that if we think about AI and quantum computing and also about generally about data standards, at the recognition field, we both need help to combat fraud, but also help to streamline our procedures. And I think all these three can help us with both handling the challenges, but also provide opportunities to be more effective in our work. And as I probably mentioned many times before, credential evaluation is both a facilitator and a gatekeeper. So if we want to combat fraud, we are actually protecting society from criminal activities. And it's really important for us to be able to be effective in that work. And we all know that criminals, they are really good at utilizing technologies. And probably they are more advanced at doing it than many credential evaluation organizations. So I think we really need to keep up with the space. The technologies are advancing because we need to use the technological help to be able to combat the fraud, but also to be able to provide more effective and innovative services to society.
Interesting. And Eric, when I think about your world, help our audience understand what is quantum computing?
That's always quite the tricky question to answer, especially as I should say I'm not like a professional quantum theorist, or even I'm actually a mathematician. But the real importance behind understanding the impact of quantum is that these what are called qubits allow for the computation. So instead of bits, we're used to bits in computers, ones and zeros. Qubits allow for computation in some would say it being able to calculate multiple values at the same time. That's one, it's still very much nuanced, much more nuanced than just stating that, but it allows for the computation of very, very hard problems that are typically considered either impossible or it would just take forever, literally the time of the universe, to calculate much, much, much quicker. Essentially what some would call in polynomial time. And we don't have to go into these types of terminology, but essentially allowing for calculating very hard, sometimes very complex optimization problems very quickly. These are what quantum computers are very good at. Quantum computers won't be able to solve everything. It's just a matter of there's like say 4 or 5 algorithm types that can be used to solve interesting hard problems.
And I think you've done an excellent job providing a Coles Notes high-level summary of quantum computing. I must compliment you, Eric. I've been studying it and looking at it closely myself to get quite comfortable. Um, and what I think is interesting, we mentioned things like single sign-on. You know, when you have your user ID and you go into any system, your system in your office, the system you use to do grade calculations for credential valuation, you always have to have a user sign-in ID. So, Eric, from the perspective of the emergence of this capacity, this capability of these qubits with quantum computing, what is a consideration there relevant to fraud, even if we just look at someone going in and doing that kind of work, identifying themselves with their user ID?
Yeah. So that is the security behind, say, single sign-on and any of these authentication protocols is typically either, this is where we'll go into some of the cryptographic algorithms actually. So there's RSA and elliptic curve. Those are the typical algorithms that are implemented that guarantee our security or in these authentications now, or privacy, another way of describing it as well. Now, from the quantum, so the risk that comes from quantum computing is that there in 1994, Peter Shor developed an algorithm, and it was, I mean, it was still theoretical in the sense that there wasn't a quantum computer that you could run it on, but that algorithm, if it were to be able to be run on a full-scale quantum computer, it will be able to crack RSA and elliptic curve algorithms, meaning that once we have say, what some would call a fault-tolerant quantum computer, people will be able to essentially break our authentication schemes.
Yeah.
And that's because the Shor's algorithm is able to factor very large numbers very efficiently.
Yes. And for those in our audience, if you're working in innovation space or if you're dealing with the build on these kinds of things, I would say, Eric and you and I've talked about this, and Alex, you and I've talked about this as well, the care and attention to thinking forward. How are you going to prepare for that future when it becomes an issue for these kinds of systems that everybody has and develops, et cetera? And maybe, Eric, I'll ask you to make a quick comment on that, and then I'm going to ask Alex to dive in.
And so there are standards that are being developed to counteract this risk of RSA being broken. And this is something that NIST in the United States has been running since 2016. They've actually published their recent standards, and Alex can probably talk about it, of course, with standards and everything. Of course, the scope of those standards is very specific, like in the context of cryptography. They're standardizing very specific algorithms to replace traditional ones, RSA. And so that impacts these credentials that everybody is starting to want to implement and use. They all are going to need to be updated. And that's really the big,
So you're talking about, for example, virtual wallets, um, uh, sometimes they call it blockchain, W3C type stuff, etc., as well as the traditional legacy type systems that we just need to be mindful and have in business planning and strategic planning, thinking forward, how do you build it in? Our governments, you've pointed this out, I've had the same situation here in my country, are very active in this space and are already providing advice and counsel to organizations. So it's just something to be aware of as we go forward. Thank you for that, Eric. And I'm going to come back to you. Alex, did you want to chime in here on any of these pieces? And you are on mute, sir.
Thank you. One of the things that I think is very, first off, the key, I think, is for things like virtual wallets, people who are building virtual wallets probably don't need to fully understand the cryptographic standards. What they need to do is have a security expert make sure that whatever they're using is the most up-to-date security procedure. So first off, I know one thing people tell me all the time, it's like, oh my God, I don't understand this stuff. And what if the quantum people break into my stuff? Well, they might. And but the key is just to stay up to date on those standards. And some of the like Eric just said, NIST just came out with FIPS 203 through 205, which are basically these things called lattice-based algorithms, which are designed, again, you don't need to know what that means. It just means that they're standards designed to help people protect against these kind of intrusions. And so I think the key is to, one, trust the security people. You don't have to become a quantum computing expert, but trust the security people. And this is going to sound so funny, but keep your computer updated. When NIST puts out a new thing, or when Microsoft updates or Apple updates, stay current. And that's the way to protect yourself, just like now with non-quantum threats, right? And so I think the world the internet's a dangerous place without those kind of protections. And I think we have to trust people like Eric and others that are working in the field to actually protect our assets, and then just make sure that our assets make sense and actually fulfill the business need of credentials, while making sure the wallets and the transport mechanisms are protected against the constantly evolving threats. Because in 5 years there'll be new threats, and we'll have to keep dancing with those.
Yeah. And when I think, Bettina, in the credentialing space, the other piece that emerged over the last couple of decades were distribution channels for documentation. So a document used to be, must get it from X institution, must be direct, must be in a sealed envelope. We still see some of that. But now there's the emergence over the past couple of decades, really starting with UCAS in the UK and UAC in Ontario in Canada, but now it's exploded with all kinds of providers where they're not the issuer, they're the conduit, the distribution channel, shall we say. So it just is a level of complexity. In your field, Bettina, what's going on with credential evaluators when they think about these distribution channel providers?
Yeah, that's a really good question, John. And I would actually like to start with saying that we are really aware of that in the credential evaluation field, the different offices have really different digital maturity levels, which means that some of them are still using paper. Some of them are only using signed PDFs. Some systems are legacy systems. They have been built like 20 years ago, 10 years ago. They are not even able to, receive data. They are not interoperable with any other systems. So of course, we use verifiable credentials. We use these digital channels or distribution channels, as you mentioned, but it's not always through the system's support. Sometimes we still need to do extra manual tasks to be able to handle digital credentials. And that's also a tricky part. So since the system support is not always there, you need to learn how to handle digital documents in another way. And I have seen that many people, when it comes to digital documents generally, are quite naive. They think that since it's digital, you can trust it. But since you actually do not know how the digital credentials should look like and what the actual distribution channel should be, then you can get tricked by fraudsters. So we have seen, fake QR codes leading to fake verification websites, like fake verification websites in general. And people, if you trust them, that's like a crazy thing, because then you will end up facilitating fraudulent activities. So I think it's a lot about digital maturity and also digital literacy of credential evaluators. But I think there is a lot of discussion nowadays about building new systems which are interoperable with all these new standards you are mentioning. In Europe, there are like really hard efforts in the European Union level to build out the European learning model system, and also to, as Alex mentioned before, it's not only about educational standards, but also to connect education and workforce standards to be able to facilitate mobility at an even higher level.
I love the word digital literacy and digital maturity. I've actually written them down, Bettina, because this is the whole reason why we're doing today's session, right? We're talking through concepts and ideas in a cross-disciplinary way to contribute to advancing sort of that digital literacy. Alex, when I look to you and I think of the interoperability and the standards piece, what are some of the assurances that you can provide or advice you can provide various organizations to get at the nub of what Martina is talking about, where, you know, there is this unevenness in terms of digital capacity in organizations?
Yeah, I think I think it's very difficult, right? So I don't have unfortunately, I don't have a silver bullet, right? A easy answer to it, because as both technology changes, you'll read articles about, oh, blockchain must be the answer to everything. Oh, ChatGPT is the answer to everything. And
Or
then
AI.
and there's this, right? And there's this temptation then to jump on whatever the latest bandwagon is when in truth, often the path to digital maturity is to actually pick one upgrade up from wherever you are and actually start to apply that. If you are using PDFs with signatures, if you're using verifiable credentials, just find a partner or hire someone who can help you to actually build out something to handle that, and then make sure everything moves to that. Part of the problem is that people will get a credential, they'll then print it out and leave it on their desk, or they'll send it by email in open format after getting it through this incredibly secure digital structure. Then they'll email it as a Word document to someone, right? And so the one of the tricks is to actually have the business processes have the right level of security and privacy, whichever is appropriate. Sometimes it doesn't matter, right? But have the right level of security and privacy that matches both the state, country, regulations you're operating under, and things like GDPR and privacy rules and privacy regulations, and and pick the standards you're going to follow, and then be. I can't believe I'm saying this, because I'm a little bit an early adopter on almost everything, but be a little cautious on jumping on the latest bandwagon, right? Always ask people who are knowledgeable in that area and go, okay, what are the pitfalls? What should I watch out for? And then leap wisely, right? If you're going to leap, I leap all the time, but try to leap wisely, right? And so, and quantum computing is an interesting one, because quantum computing is actually, I think, end up being safer in some ways than others, because it's so hard to understand that you have to rely on experts almost to do anything useful with it. No one is going to be just, oh, I'll just build a quantum computer in my backyard and use it for my business. That's probably not going to happen. Unless, Eric, you disabuse me of that and say, no, we're coming out with our kindergarten quantum computing.
Well, and
I
Eric,
can,
the visual behind you, you have to tell our audience about that.
yeah, I don't know which computer it is, but that one's well, the most recent we have is a 50 qubit quantum computer at VTT. And it's funny you mentioned that kind of this ability to use quantum computers. It is actually open to, or maybe ours isn't, but there are accessible quantum computers that people can actually play with nowadays, right now. You guys can sign on, and at IBM, they have some free services where you can start to learn. The real big thing is, because it's so hard to learn, they need people to start as soon as possible to like get
Yes.
into it and to like just play with it and get the premise even. And so IBM is actually quite good at that. I'm not selling them things, but I have friends of theirs. I'm friends with some of the people there, and
Yeah, I
So
don't have a
the,
problem with that.
yeah, sorry, but they the realm of quantum is quite daunting. Let's say it that way. I've been in a research project for the past couple years, and it's just takes so much time to like really process how to really understand what they'll be able to do. And
So
yeah,
I have a question in the chat, Eric and Alex. It's technical, so bear with me, Patina, on this one because I want to make sure Guido gets his answer. Guido's question is this: from semantical level, we have Emrex and Elmo, and ELM 100% interoperable. He's talking about Europe. He's talking about the
Yeah.
data standards and so on. And with converters, convertible. So his question is, what semantical standards do we need more? And what I would like to add to that question is, given the conversation about AI and quantum computing, um, thoughts there. So perhaps we start first with Alex and then give Eric a chance to dive in. Go ahead, Alex.
Well, well, in reference to, first off, I think that I'm going to answer that actually at two levels, right? First, at the level of not at the level of talking about quantum or cryptography or anything like that, but talking about just in general, the MREX and ELMO standards. One of the they're very powerful, and I think that brilliant work has been done in that area. And I think that to make them the next step to make them more semantically interoperable is to have them work with the other regions of the world that are also developing software, right? Because the problem is software is now a global problem, not a local problem. You know, if you have a standard in Europe, but someone's building something in South America, that is not helpful, right? Because people might not be using Elmo. They're probably not, as a matter of fact. And sometimes I've even talked to standards experts in the United States who literally don't know what MREX is. They like don't even know what it is. Never mind use it or apply it, or they don't even, they're like, what is this MREX you're talking about? Which is crazy. If you live in Europe, you think that's insane, right? But so I think the key next step on moving the semantical standards forward is to do international work with the US bodies of standards, work with Australia, work with China, work with the various bodies that are doing standards work, and look for union. Look for places where we can actually make things equivalent so that if something's built in the United States, it's easy to do an equivalency, right? It's easy to do, oh, they're using this standard. Okay, good. That's the equivalent of this. Or they're using the same, or even better, we actually identify a global standard. That may not happen for a long time, but maybe even better we do that, right? So that's one answer, right, on that side. On the side of the on the cryptography kind of world, Eric's probably better oriented to answer this, but there's the European Union Agency for Cybersecurity, right, that are actually working and tracking the NIST standards and are actually moving in and building out things. Etsy has actually built what's it called? Quantum secure cryptography working group or something. I don't know, something like that, right? They have a working group that's designed to do this. And I think on that side, I think it's and that's a small enough community still, I think. Eric, again, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but I think that's a small enough community that the people at Etsy and the people at NIST and the people, internationally, I think there's an opportunity for us to create a unified set of standards around the inputs, the outputs, and the structure of these kind of cryptography protections that that will be very useful for people building tools and serving learners and workers and such as we go forward. So that's what I would say, Joanne.
So that's very helpful. Eric, did you want to sort of chime in a little bit here?
yeah, sure. It's funny how Alex mentioned MRICS because I had no idea what it was, and it's because I went to school in the States. So and I'm from the States, so I was like, I have no clue, but I Googled it and I figured it out now. But yeah, it's quite entertaining. Otherwise, in terms of the standards, in terms of cryptography and the current status in that sense, like we mentioned already, NIST, and these standards are what are called post-quantum cryptography. these new algorithms. And so NIST has been pushing this development of these new algorithms. They've had this competition going, and they recently finally standardized a few. There's still a few more that are being studied. Europe has been a bit more, say, skeptical about the new algorithms and then the new, say, the hardness problems that are being used in them. So that's caused, I'd say, I guess, more of a delay in the standardizations in the European level. And that has worried me and my colleagues quite a bit. And there's also in Europe a drive for more of a hybrid setting of implementation of multiple types of algorithms at the same time, which is actually, so I hadn't mentioned it, my real interest, like where I came into this realm of credentials, is we actually implemented a hybrid scheme in these verifiable credentials in a Horizon, basically a cascaded funding Horizon Europe project. And so we actually studied how to implement these new algorithms with verifiable credentials. And of course, with all the interests, of course, aligned in the sense that we want to secure these credentials, but we need interoperability, right? And that's, of course, one of the biggest challenges in credentialing. And I guess that's where MREX comes in as well as building this type of
So maybe,
ecosystem of
yeah.
use. So.
So maybe I suggest, Eric, you've mentioned NIST and you've mentioned some others, Alex. Please feel free to put links in the chat as we go along. Some might not be familiar with these acronyms because Guido's question is, what more do we need on the semantical standards front? And I think that's one of the issues with our audience is, what do I do with this? Where to next? So that's one example, just getting that information, those exemplars. I want to kind of shift gears a little bit to Bettina, and I also want to talk a little bit around the opportunity side related to AI, for example, in the credential recognition space, which, in my opinion, when combined with quantum computing, it will just be out to the stars in terms of the possibilities at some point in the future. So what I would say, Bettina, I mean, I'm familiar with, I had a wonderful demo from Scalero, who's one of our GDN signatories, where they're doing some very interesting things with grade conversions and so on, and the AI space. Are there some examples that, and I invite my colleagues that are in the attendees, if they want to send a link to anything of this nature of an exemplar that they know of, please do so. We are capturing the links. But Bettina, in your space, have you seen some other examples of exemplars where they've taken some of this new technology? Maybe they haven't actually actualized it yet. Maybe it's a study or a research piece that actually would be helpful. Share with us.
Yeah, there are several initiatives. If we just start with STICEP, we have a task force, we have an AI task force. And there we are actually working on building a GPA calculator, which is going to be accessible for members. We have been also testing some software to detect fraud. And we are going to publish soon a position paper about the use of AI in credential evaluation. And there are several, solutions which are already used in different organizations. So I know many universities already use AI to streamline their admission procedures. And probably they started with national admissions because that's easier, but then they are shifting towards international admissions too. And in that case, they use AI, for example, to skip manual entry, to get the degree title automatically in their system, to translate transcripts without needing to require translations from the applicants. And also, as I mentioned, I have heard that some of them are trying to detect fraud, which is actually a tricky question because we have been also thinking about it in the Swedish
Bettina, you're cutting out a little bit. We just want to mention you're cutting out.
Education. We have the
So Bettina,
okay.
you're cutting.
You.
Try that last bit. Can you repeat?
I'm just checking. Okay.
Can you repeat that last
Yeah.
bit?
So I was mentioning that yeah, so at the Swedish Council for Higher Education, we have also been thinking about, detecting fraudulent documents with the help of AI. But that's a tricky question because we have the
Yes.
European Union AI Act, which actually identifies detecting fraud with the help of AI as a high risk issue, which means that it requires more technical documentation. The rules are more rigid. So when it comes, especially when it comes to detecting fraud, and the decision should lead to access to work permit, for example, then it's considered high risk. So we should really, be careful about what the regulation says. And I would like to actually mention some other solutions, because we usually talk about AI as something which can streamline our procedures, like intern procedures. But not everyone is talking about providing innovative solutions to society. And credential evaluators, we work for the society, we work for our citizens. And I have seen some services, for example, in Sweden, there is one which is called Switch to Sweden. And that's an AI generated model, which actually matches newly graduated students from Swedish universities who are from third countries. So they probably won't be able to stay in Sweden if they don't find a job. So this software, this matches their competencies with employers, so that they can actually find a job in Sweden. So I think that we should also think about more innovative solutions like this, which actually, for the better of society.
The Ontario government just launched My Careers innovation to do similar types of matching to resources. I don't know if it's using AI or anything like that. I would bet you it probably is. But that work you're doing in Sweden, that example, if you have a URL that you can URL that you can share in the chat, that would be really interesting. I want to pull the thread of the piece about the European government regulations, where you want to use the AI for document fraud, but you have this regulatory framework. Are you suggesting, therefore, that in order to do it, you have to justify it in some way or put it in a context and a structure that is mindful of the regulations? Help us understand that a bit, Bettina.
Yeah, of course, it's more about we need to be mindful about the regulations. So the European AI Act identifies 3 categories of AI use, and one of them is high risk. We have medium risk. We have also low risk. And then there are actually the 4th category is prohibited. So you are not allowed to use it. And this one I mentioned, this is considered high risk. So it means you can still use it, but you need to require technical documentation, which is also described in the regulation, what kind of technical documentation you need to receive. And there should be human control, of course. So it shouldn't be just like, an AI recommendation and the decision is made by AI, but there should always be a human who is actually making the decision. So I think it's more about, that our lawyers need to be aware of how to handle the technical solutions and require all this documentation under the procurement procedure.
So, Eric, do you have a similar kind of context that you're bumping into in Finland with the work at VTT?
In terms of the
The
AI
regulations, and do you
regulations,
work with AI at all, or are you strictly quantum
um,
computing?
I myself I'm not studying AI. At VTT, we've actually started, there's been more of a push to kind of implement or use AI in our research if possible. It kind of, but that's used like case by case, really. Not so much for myself in my research team. I believe we have another research team that is working on the security of generative AI and all the aspects that come along with that. And being able to determine the kind of the various levels of security that come along with that. But I myself am more in the mathematics and interests of quantum.
Yeah. And what
That,
about you, Alex? Is there similar things you're bumping into or you're hearing about in your walk related to what Bettina describes?
Yeah, I mean, I think that the problem of regulatory frameworks is that they're often 10 years behind what's actually happening. And that maybe that's an exaggeration, but maybe not, right? Legislators are not quantum computer experts, and they're not AI experts, and they often, what they know about AI is what they read in the newspaper. And so it's very difficult sometimes for people whose job, and by the way, that's not a critique of legislators. It's their job is not to do that. Their job is to, run the whatever organization or state or country they're in. But they are often some of these when new technology comes out, there's sometimes a surge in regulation that has to be handled sort of carefully. As an example, one of the states I work with regulated that a standard they were using for the K-12 data interoperability, in the legislation, they wrote that you must use standard version 3.2, which of course, by the time that legislation came out, it was already at 3.5, right? So it was basically the law that you had to use the old standard that had been improved, and it took almost 2 years to get that law changed so that they took the version number out and replaced it with the current version or 2 standards earlier or whatever. I forget exactly what the language was, but little tiny mistakes like that, which may not seem to which at the time, those legislators were very forward thinking. They're like, oh, we need to use standards. But what they then did is they legislated something that blocked the ability for innovation to happen in their state. And so I think it's incumbent on us, if you're in the certification space or you're in the education space and there's legislation happening in that area and wherever you are, I think it's incumbent on us just to be awake to that and to inform our legislators. Write to your legislators, make sure that regulation makes sense, because people get afraid and then there's political pressure against something, and sometimes new technologies get demonized or glorified. Either they think it's the answer to everything or they demonize it, and then you get very bad legislation then. And so it is very difficult, and obviously you don't want to break the law. So you want to make sure you're protecting citizens and you're protecting their privacy and security, and you want innovation at the same time. And so it's a tricky, awareness is the key. And again, everyone can't be an expert on everything, but if you can get someone in your organization to be as informed as possible about stuff like that, then you can navigate those regulatory waters more easily.
So, Bettina, you're the one that was educating us on the EU policies around AI. Do you have any thoughts or reaction to this? Because I do think a lot of the work, there's at least 4 or 5 countries represented here today on this panel, and we all come from different experiences in terms of our political context and our legislative context. I'm often fascinated by the European approach. Any comments around that, Bettina?
Yeah, I agree with Alex that it's often like that regulations are not following the technological advancements not quite quickly. So if we make a regulation today, then it's not going to be applicable tomorrow.
Right.
But I also want to mention, like, this is like a typical example from Sweden. So we have like a cooperation between different Swedish government authorities, where we can together try out new technologies. And lately we have been working in this AI lab, was it called? So we have been testing the same platform where we could build our AI assistants. It was like a limited platform. It did not give access to, internal servers and stuff like that. But we realized after using this platform, after some weeks using this platform and having discussions with other authorities,
Sorry,
that
Bettina.
every lawyer at different authorities universities identified different problems with using the platform. So it was like they were interpreting the regulation differently also. At the end of this test period, we agreed that this is actually something the Swedish government needs to handle, because this is going to be a huge barrier if different government agencies handle AI technologies differently based on how you interpret the regulation. So there should be kind of like common standards and common interpretation about what you are allowed to use, what data you are allowed to enter, and about any other requirements.
Eric, do you have any comments around this? And I see Alex also has his hand up. Go
Well,
ahead, Eric.
at
Go ahead,
least
Eric.
either way. I have comments at least definitely about interoperability in the context of even in credentials in that realm. In Europe, for instance, we have the European digital identity credentials. So there's mandated wallets that the European Union wants all of the countries to offer to their constituents. And so we're talking about, and this already was brought up about the timeline, how everything takes a really long time, especially from the governments to establish types of say standards or regulations. Well, the current versions of these digital wallets, they don't include the concept of these new algorithms, these that are secure for quantum computing. Now, that might not be necessary right away, but the timeline is getting shorter. It's starting to get closer to less than 10 years from now, where we have quantum computers that are able to run these Shor's algorithm and things like this that puts a risk at usage of these credentials. And so this discussion is especially important in terms of AI, of course, is accelerating like crazy. And so it seems to be happening with quantum as well at the same time.
Interesting. Alex, you had a comment.
Yes, I think that the one of the things we talk about using technology and AI, whether it's AI or quantum computing, but semantic interoperability is actually probably more important than any of that. And all the technology interoperability is just designed to empower semantic interoperability. The whole point is with a credential is that you learn something here and someone is claiming that you know it and is asserting it, and then that is understood on the other side of the wire, right? On the other side of that communication. If that's not happening, then it does not matter how fancy your system is or what technology you use. And so I think we have to, I think earlier, I think Bettina mentioned there are all sorts of different standards, right? And so we have to work on all of them at the same time. Because if you build a brilliant race car that gets you from point A to point B, but there's no one in the car when it arrives at point B, then nothing has happened and you wasted a lot of money and energy. So I think the semantic interoperability portion of it becomes very important. And that interesting probably isn't helped by quantum computing, but it is helped by AI. AI could be an assistant to very smart people and systems in crafting articulations of certifications such that they're understood in a new context. And that's one of the things that I'm hoping we'll see as we move into the future of applying AI to credential recognition.
So I just want to say for our audience, which has different levels of understanding of even the word semantic interoperability.
Okay, good.
We have a website on the GDN website where in the webinar section where we did a trust series and we did a whole webinar on the differences between the different types of interoperability. So you will want to take a look at that if you're sort of swimming a little bit there. But I'll ask this in simple terms, Alex, when you use the term semantic interoperability, are you talking about ensuring that what's visible to the credential evaluator is understood by the credential evaluator? Are you talking about something else? So can you clarify that?
I am. That's a part of what I'm talking about. And when I say semantic, I mean that the words, labels, and vocabulary that's being used on one side of the communication is equivalent to the words, and vocabulary and understanding that's on the other side. So if you have a course, say someone has learned to add integers, that adding integers is understood on both sides of that. I'm using that as a stupid, simple example, obviously, right? But that adding integers is actually understood on both sides of the communication. And that's what I mean by semantic interoperability. And therefore, an evaluator can go, oh, in Europe, in this school system, when they learn to add integers, that includes fractions, which would be stupid, but okay, right? And then they can then adjust and apply the right credentialing to that input because of that knowledge. And that's where, again, technology could help, where the AI might even be able to figure that out and provide recommendations to the evaluator. So it still needs to probably be evaluated by a human, but then instead of the evaluator having to do all the legwork, they can actually go, this is from here, this is these standards in Europe, now this person's going to school here in the United States, and these are the standards we use, here's the mapping, click, approve, right? And have it be that simple and that easy. That's what I mean by semantic interoperability.
So Bettina, thinking from the point of view of a credential evaluator who's simply trying to say that this evidence of learning equates to what we have in our country, or that for the purpose for which I'm trying to evaluate it. We have all these different technologies, all these different concepts. What is your best advice to that credential evaluator when they're listening to all of this and taking it all in? Because I think trust matters. I think quality assurance matters. And these topics aren't meant to erode all of that feeling. It's meant to say, this is the new universe. What's your best advice to that credential evaluator?
Yeah, I've been actually thinking about semantic interoperability, but I will get back to it a little later. I would just say that we at TISEP, for example, we share best practices, and we are aware of that there are different global standards. And as Alex mentioned before, it's not going to happen tomorrow that we have one global standard which is applicable for the whole world, but we are going to be different types of. So we need to learn to handle them. But I am also aware of, and we all know that in the credential evaluation space, we kind of understand each other. We try to use the same terms. We know each other's educational systems. So I think, being a part of TISEP as a global organization, you learn a lot about these best practices and about these common terms we use, which actually are used in semantic interoperability. So if I just take the example of Europe, of course, for us, it's easy to build semantic interoperability because we have the Bologna cycles. We have a diploma supplement. So everything is already in there. You don't need to find new words or new terms. And I think these terms are known all over the credential evaluation world. So I think that the problem is not about semantic interoperability. It's more about the technical part, and it's not something which we can really affect. It's more about just to see how the global standards will develop, and of course how different regions and countries will regulate also these standards, as we have seen and mentioned. So I would say follow what's happening around the world, but I actually trust that semantic and interoperability is easily accessible in the credential evaluation world. And I just wanted to mention that there is actually a project which is financed by the European Union, and it's connected to the European digital credentials, where credential evaluator organizations look at semantics in our recognition statements. And compare those semantics to try to add those into the European Digital Credentials platform. And this would make it possible for credential evaluation organizations to use European digital credentials instead of their own systems. So to use that system to issue credential evaluation statements. But before we can use the system for that, we of course need to agree on the semantics. But I think that that is not going to be a hard task because we already use, in the credential evaluation field, we already use kind of the same terms.
So I'd love to see the URL for that particular project so that I can just read more about it. I'm mindful of time, but you've sparked something for me. I just came back from talking with colleagues in South Africa and met with Zambia, Eswatini, and Kenya colleagues, experts in the recognition space. And I was so impressed with their work to develop qualification frameworks so that not only do they get them organized in their own countries, but that they can have translation occurring in terms of credentials and outcomes between their countries. So there's some fascinating work going on there, and it's been informed by some of the European work as well as their own local context. And I know there's similar work going on in other regions, and there's also long-standing frameworks, et cetera. I think that there's that policy level, that quality assurance level, there's the technical level, the standards level where data exchange, because in Canada, for example, there's a heavy reliance on XML. It's not, an EPSI world. So there's work going on with organizations in Europe to look at that and examine potential for translation between the different ones. We can't boil the ocean today. We only have 4 more minutes left. I want to take the time to, number one, thank our panelists for a really interesting discussion. I always find we get to some point, but not always, it's always an opportunity to come back again. We will be holding in Oslo on October 29th to the 31st, a GDN convening that has all these kinds of experts and many more from around the world coming in, people from Africa, from North America, Canada, from Asia, etc., talking, and from Latin America, talking about these very topics, as well as about the workforce skills topic, more on recognition, more on governance, and so on. So I invite my colleagues to join us in Norway. Very excited about that convening, which in fact is being co-hosted by the Norwegian government through HK Bettina's counterpart in Norway, as well as SICT, which is the national interoperability guru organization supporting exchange and services for the communities, the institutions, the universities in that particular country. And so there'll be a lot of conversation that's probing into some of this, hoping that Eric and Alex and Bettina, you can join us and those in the audience. In addition, we have another webinar coming up where we're going to be probing more deeply on the area of trust. And we're actually looking, with the good help of True Merit and a few others like Velocity Network Foundation, et cetera, to explore the area of the healthcare sector and what are some of the nuances to the healthcare sector that inform this ongoing dialogue. The GDN has been really focused on connecting with networks. So we're in chats, Bettina, hopefully with TISAP, at EPIC. I will be at the UNESCO Global Convention in Paris in a couple of weeks as we talk about some of these important digital emerging themes and topics. The network of networks concept for the GDN is really about partnering with others, such as PESC, such as data standards, et cetera, in order to help lift all boats up, ensure the right conversations are happening, and that we're dealing with the tough nut business problems in the room. So thank you for helping us understand some of the interconnections between AI, quantum computing, document fraud, and the recognition space. We've scratched at the surface, and I know more is to come. Colleagues, I appreciate your time. Thank you.